No.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to our Muslim Women Scholar Series and to our very first hybrid series. We're very excited to have all of you join us virtually and in person. We're going to start with the recitation of Quran and then followed by a land acknowledgement. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين Ameen. In the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful. Praise be to Allah, Lord of the worlds, the most gracious, the most merciful. Master of the day of judgment, it is we worship, and upon you we call for help. Guide us to the straight path, the path of those you have blessed, none of those against whom there is anger, nor of those who are misguided. And for the land acknowledgement, I begin by acknowledging that Allah created humanity in and of this earth as her Khalifa, and this land that we're on has been a site of human activity for 15,000 years. We can never work to end systematic and institutional violence if we do not center the narratives of indigenous folks in our collective decision-making for social justice and equity. As settlers in Turtle Island, we directly benefit from the colonization and genocide of the indigenous people of this land. In order to engage in resistance and solidarity against the injustices inflicted on the indigenous people of this land, it is imperative we constantly engage in acts of decolonization. Therefore, I would like to acknowledge that this land is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Pitton First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. This territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on this territory. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and to any who may be here with us today, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Miigwech. And now I'm going to ask Nina Karachi Khalid to give her welcome remarks.
Thank you, Zainab. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and welcome to another session of CCMW's Women Scholars Series. For the past 40 years, the Canadian Council of Muslim Women, or CCMW, has been on an important mission to affirm Canadian Muslim women's identities and to promote an understanding of our lived experiences through community engagement, through research, through influencing public policy, and through striving for positive change. One of CCMW's strategic goals is to promote critical thinking among Muslims and non-Muslims, to challenge stereotypes and assumptions about Islam, Muslim women, and their families. This webinar, it's a hybrid one, it's our first time trying it. I'm sorry we're a little late starting. It's part of a series of public seminars focusing on the work of contemporary Muslim women scholars that are based on different topics related to Muslim women. We're looking forward to continuing to present these seminars for many more years, inshallah. I will now pass the baton on to Professor Anwar Ayman, our co-host tonight. He's the director of the Institute of Islamic Studies at University of Toronto and a professor of law at the University of Toronto's Faculty of Law. His research focuses on pre-modern and modern Islamic history and theory. We're so fortunate to be able to hold this event here at U of T. And before Anwar comes up, I want to do a little plug. This is the book, The Color of God, by Professor Ayesha Chaudhry. There's another cover. It has a beautiful picture of her when she's a little girl, but that's the one that I got. And if you just go on Amazon, you can order that yourself. And it's an amazing read. Anwar?
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome everyone to University of Toronto. Nina, thank you for that. It's really nice to have you back here at U of T. And I want to thank CCMW for once again allowing us to partner with you on another amazing event. We just had you a little while ago when we had a German delegation, and it was been really great to have CCMW's presence. And also thank you to the students, faculty, colleagues. Jim Riley, for some of you who may not know, is a long-standing member here at U of T, whose leadership we miss, though we hope you a wonderful retirement. So it's nice to see you here. I'd like to just begin by introducing our two speakers, after which I will quickly sit down because they're the ones here who we're here to see. So let me begin. On my far left is Dr. Ayesha Chaudhry. I'm going to read a boilerplate introduction, which is hard for me because I've known Ayesha for so long, and she is a sister to me. But I'm going to start with that, and then I'll maybe tell a small personal story if that is okay with her. So Ayesha Chaudhry is the Canada Research Chair in Religion, Law, and Social Justice, and Professor of Islamic Studies and Gender Studies at the University of British Columbia. She's a member of the College of the Royal Society of Canada and a Pierre Elliott Trudeau Fellow. She's held residential fellowship at the Peter Wall Institute for Advanced Studies at UBC and the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard. She is the author of The Color of God, which Nina just plugged. So please, if you haven't purchased one, please do. And Domestic Violence and the Islamic Tradition, Ethics, Law, and the Muslim Discourses on Gender from Oxford University Press in 2014. To my more immediate left is Alia Hogben, the former executive director. Oh wait, before I start with Alia, I just want a quick note. My children had hoped to be here today. They are 10 and 8. And for them, Ayesha is not a professor. She's Auntie Ayesha. She's their Muslim godmother. And so my eldest ended up having a sore throat, but it was really hard for them not to be here. And I know that we had a chance to video chat with them, but it meant a lot to them. And so thank you for that. Alia Hogben is the former executive director of CCMW and has been an infallible voice for equality, equity, and empowerment of Canadian Muslim women and girls. The CCMW, says Alia, seeks to empower Canadian Muslim women in Canadian society and to promote an interpretation of Islam that is, quote, humane, egalitarian, and equality-driven, end quote. In 2012, Alia became the second Canadian Muslim woman to be awarded the Order of Canada for her work in advocacy on women's rights. A year earlier, she was awarded an honorary doctorate by Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, on the recommendation of the Queen's School of Religion. This year, Alia was awarded an honorary doctorate by Victoria University of the University of Toronto. So welcome to both of you here to the U of T. And I turn it over to the two of you, correct? All right.
All right. Well, I think I'm going to go next. So I'll start by saying thank you so much to the Institute for Islamic Studies and to Anvar Iman for co-hosting this event. And thank you so much to CCMW, to Nuzhat, to all of the people who work so hard to make this event possible. Thank you very much. And I want to thank Alia as well and Murray for driving her here, for coming together, for driving. It's a 4-hour drive, I think, at least from Kingston. They came yesterday and they're leaving tomorrow. So thank you so much for doing this so that we can have this conversation. It's very moving to me. It's very meaningful to me. And, I want to thank you for who you are and for the spaces that you have created. I think that literally and metaphorically, you have made the space that we're having this conversation in possible. So I want to thank you for that before I begin. So I think the format is going to be that I'm going to read a little bit from a talk that I've written today for this book, and then I'm going to read a little excerpt from it. And then Alia and I will be in conversation together about it. And then we'll open it up for Q&A to the audience who is here with us in person and via Zoom. So to begin, do you remember the first time you experienced a story, like a good story, a story that captivated you and made you feel things, like really feel things in your body, made your body tingle with pleasure or fear, made your eyes water, was so overwhelmingly feeling that as you remember it, you might remember the precise details of the setting. You might remember the texture of the cotton bedsheet you might be tucked under, or the smell of your mother's armpit through a polyester kameez after a day of cooking, or the firmness of the green beans in your hands as you sit shelling beans for dinner in the sunlight. But you cannot find the words to describe the experience or maybe even repeat the details of the story. Do you remember being told a story you can still feel in your body, but cannot recall with enough detail to repeat? If you can, you've been transformed by story, even if you cannot remember what exactly the story was. This is the power of story, of a good story anyways. It can shape and mold us. It can influence us. It can make us feel and believe things while bypassing what we might call our critical faculties. It reminds us that there's more to us than the small parts of our brains than the small part of our brains that communicates in words. What is it that Descartes said? I think, therefore I am. And Audre Lorde responded with, I feel, therefore I can be free. A good story shows us we are bigger than ourselves. We can commune with others, feel what they feel, that we are always eternally formed and reformed by others, by those around us. As Octavia Butler says, all that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. The work of Indigenous scholars like Leanne Simpson and Robin Wall Kimmerer show us that stories are theory, and stories are how we receive knowledge and pass it along. Stories are remembered in our bodies. They stay with us even when the facts we memorize fly away. Stories are us. And as Black writers and thinkers like John Edgar Weideman and Barbara Christian show us, stories are how we survive. Stories are how we create archives of ourselves. They are maps, and they can show the way, or at least a way. My earliest memories of hearing stories is from my mother, who is an excellent storyteller. What makes her a great storyteller is that she can enter the story she is telling, become a character in the story, and actually experience the story as it unfolds. She is the mother of Moses, a terrified woman who has to do the hardest thing a mother can do, try to save her baby's life by letting him go. She wraps her sweet little unweaned baby carefully in a cotton wrap, cries softly as she gently puts him into a basket, steals her breaking heart as she puts that basket into the river, hoping against hope, hoping the impossible, that her beloved son will not drown, will not be lost, will not be eaten by an alligator, that the basket will not topple in a swift current of the river, but that rather he will be found by a resident of Pharaoh's palace, that her friend who works there will make a case to call in a nursemaid, that nursemaid will be her. She is hoping that the man who wants to kill her child will be the one who will raise him. Then my mother is Moses, chatting with God at the burning bush, pressing God to choose her brother Aaron as a prophet instead of himself, making a case why God might not want to choose him after all. I did murder someone by accident, he tells God. My mother is Yaku, going blind from the sorrow of losing his son, and she is Yusuf, wanting to mess with his brothers and teach them a lesson for abandoning him in the well. Like I said, she's a great storyteller. Other stories I remember hearing as a child were scary stories my cousins and aunts and uncles would tell on cold winter nights when the lights were out in Pakistan. We'd sit huddled under heavy blankets on the bed, eating chilgose and dried apricots and almonds, candles lit around the room, away from the blankets. Tell us a scary story, we would plead, and they'd launch into them. These are stories I remember with my body. They are not stored in me cerebrally. I cannot recount them to you, but they were thrilling and tantalizing and so much fun to hear in the safety of a warm bed surrounded by family. The earliest stories I heard were free. I heard them because someone in my life was moved to share them with me, and because I was in the mood for listening. They were unpublished stories, even the stories of the prophets. I heard my mother's version of those stories. They were filtered through her body, through her experiences, through her memory. And memory does a beautiful thing to stories. It changes them. It adds colors and hues that might not have existed before. It removes details that don't feel relevant. Memory makes the story alive and moving. It is not static. Each person will tell you the same story differently. These free stories didn't cost me money to hear. I didn't buy them. Someone had not purchased them for me. They were not commodities. They had not been through the publishing process. No one had made an assessment on their marketability. They had not been edited for a specific imagined audience. I was the audience of the stories I received. I say all this to say that it is an interesting challenge to tell a story that will be commodified. When I first started writing the book we will be discussing today, I started out writing stories, and I was writing them for myself by hand in notebooks. I didn't know yet that they would become a book. I had no idea that they would even work as a book. I started out writing the stories for myself and for my beloveds. The writing felt like being in a relationship with a living text. The text I wrote was alive. It morphed and changed. I formed it and it formed me. But then something curious began to happen. Something curious began to happen once I started thinking of the stories as a book. As I tried to bring the book into the world beyond my immediate social circle, beyond my partner, my friends, my community, as I began pitching the books to agents, to publishing editors, discussing with the marketing team how to sell the book, I started having trouble talking about the book. I found it extremely difficult to answer the question, what is this book about? Turning the book from a thing I was in a relationship with, a living and transforming thing, a thing that felt like a part of me, into a commodity, a product for sale, something that is of me, but also somehow free of me, unencumbered by me or my ideas about it. This process, from writing a book to publishing it, can feel like a process of alienation. It feels to me very much as how Anna Singh, in her brilliant book, Mushroom at the End of the World, describes a process of alienation in the sale of matsutake mushrooms, a kind of mushroom that is not easily cultivated and so must be harvested by seasonal workers in the forests of the Pacific Northwest, Japan, China, and Finland. Singh describes in great detail the methods of mushroom picking. Mushroom pickers come from various communities and histories. They bring these communities and histories with them into the forest as they develop techniques of finding and harvesting matsutake mushrooms. Some pickers might crawl on their knees and find mushrooms by feel, whereas others might rely on their sight. In each case, pickers develop a relationship to the landscape and the mushrooms. They love the mushrooms. They are proud of what they harvest. They rely on their relationships with buyers too, as they enter the small open ticket market to sell their mushrooms. The price of the mushroom is not fixed, and so each time they sell their mushrooms, pickers and buyers must agree on a price. This means that pickers and buyers must enter the delicate dance of haggling. Haggling is an ugly word for the delicacy of negotiations that occur when a buyer and a seller negotiate the price of an item a seller wants to sell, and a buyer wants to buy. Relationship, again, is key to this exchange. Contrast these intimate encounters in the forest and in the open ticket, encounters based on closely seeing and listening, smelling and touching, first the land and then the mushrooms, then humans and mushrooms, responding to minute cues the untrained eye of the stranger would miss, to the airport tarmacs or warehouses nearby, where people are hired as counters to count mushrooms that arrive in boxes, to arrange them by size and color, to throw away anomalies, any mushroom too big or too small or the wrong color. There's no relationship between the counters and the mushrooms. Their job is to streamline the mushroom and package them so they are ready for sale. When reading Singh's book, I was struck by the similarities in the process of mushroom picking and publishing. The market demands conformity, and even if a book breaks or disrupts genre and narrative expectations, it must be made to sound like it does not, to be considered ready for sale. And this feels to me like a metaphor for life in the wreckage of colonialism, which is a world of racialized capitalism, of alienation, of displacement, of a rupture of relationships of all kind, to the earth, to water, to air, to non-human animals, to each other. And this rupture of relationships is necessary to turn things into commodities. It is only when they have become free of relationship that things can be bought and sold, that humans, non-human animals, that land, water, air, time even, can be owned. Singh writes that it is once the mushrooms reach the warehouses and tarmacs, once they reach the markets of the larger towns and cities, once they are cut off from everyone that harvested them and those who are in relationship with those people, that the mushroom breaks free, becoming fully alienated creatures of exchange. This definition of free as fully alienated creatures of exchange is not the freedom we often think of when we talk about being free, but it is the free that is often conjured up by the neoliberal capitalist state, where everything and everyone has a price, where everyone and everything can be bought and sold. It is what is meant by the free in free market. But free for whom? Free from whom? The free in freedom is necessarily maintained through violence. What was the ethos of that Dutch East India Company again? No trade without war and no war without trade. Jan Cohen, the director of the Dutch East India Company, explained this ethos to his board of directors in 1614. arguing that trade in Asia must be maintained under the protection of their weapons, and their weapons must be paid for from the profits of the trade. Reminds me of a sign I once saw on the way to the airport in Auckland. Dangerous goods prohibited. Even if it is dangerous, it is still a good because it is free of relationship and exchangeable commodity. It is in the wreckage of this colonialism of all the East India companies, the Dutch, the British, the Portuguese, that we all find ourselves today. In her book, Singh shows us how after the matsutake mushroom has become a fully alienated creature of exchange, it can still once again enter into relationship. It can build relationships, whether it is by being offered as a prize gift or cooked in a delicious broth for family and friends. The alienation is not eternal. The market's annihilation is not complete. Relationships can emerge in the aftermath of alienation. The book too, despite the intentions and machinations of the market, can enter relationships. It can be gifted. It can be experienced as a gift. It can build new relationships. The writer can find a way to connect with her writing again, albeit this relationship must be forged anew and can never be what it once was. The book no longer belongs to the author alone. Others may lay claim to it. It is no longer, as it never was, the writer's property. Turning scholarship into property, Singh teaches us, is theft, as it falsely claims ownership over what can only be created in the commons. So what is this book about and why did I write it? My answer to those questions right now, having written all of this, is that the book is about life in the wreckage of colonialism. Usually we think of colonialism, of all the East India companies, of partition, of the displacement of people from their homes, of refugees created by war, as these grand historical narratives, these almost cosmological events that were steered more by fate than by any individual or group of individuals. But in a word, colonialism is theft, and the book tries to trace the contours of some small lives that are shaped by and transformed by this theft. It tries to enter the intimate spaces, the relationships we have within our families, with our parents, with our siblings, with ourselves, with our bodies, with what we wear, with how we groom our hair, with how and who we love, with how we think about death, to see how all of these things and more are touched by this theft, cast in its wreckage. It wonders about how we love ourselves and each other in this wreckage. It is about being the inheritors of a double diaspora, of being unsettled by colonialism in our homelands and then becoming settlers ourselves in colonized lands, in the homelands of others. It is about our homes being stolen and participating in the theft of the homes of others. It is about the violence that is made necessary by our claims of belonging. It is about entanglement, how we are connected to everyone and everything around us, the beautiful and ugly truths that our entanglements reveal, that we cannot stand apart from others, that the individual is never an island unto themselves, and that our boundaries are porous, and that we are deeply complicit in the injustices that abound around us. Even if we abhor them, we benefit from them. In this way, the book is a study of Puritanism, which is to say a study of sorrow. Puritanism is a worship of the pure. I'm curious about the discourses of Puritanism in formal religious beliefs and practices, in nationalist discourses of citizenship and extremism, in academic disciplines about rigor and excellence, and even in a mindset that requires neat, discrete categories of good and bad. Puritanism is a desire to eradicate the messy, the complicated, the unruly, for the simple and the clean. It is a worship of an idea over and against the human, as it turns our humanity into a pollutant. It severs relationships and creates the alienation necessary to create free exchange. Puritanism is disfiguring to everything it touches, especially the human animal. The book explores this universal impulse for Puritanism through the lens of Islam. Perhaps nothing resists visions of Puritanism the way grief does, because grief is fundamentally ungovernable. It does not follow a schedule. It cannot be disciplined. It does what it needs to. It is leaky. It is messy. When grief confronts Puritanism, we must either disfigure ourselves to submit to the Puritanism, or we can surrender to our humanity and see that our ideas of the pure are misguided and rooted maybe in self-hate. The book is a resistance to Puritanism in both its form and its content, in resisting the idea that ideas must be separated away from the author and their lived experience. Rather, it argues that we can only understand ideas by seeing how they emerge from and serve those who argue for them. In this way, the book is a work of embodied theory. It makes arguments from lived experience. And since I'm still living, I'm still experiencing things. My relationship to myself and others to this book continues to unfold. I'm finding my feelings about various essays in the book being recast as I think of them anew in light of evolving relationships. Take, for example, the essay called Theft, which I will read to you today. I have read from this chapter several times this year, but every time I have read it, I have skipped the first section of the chapter, which sets up the theory to come. Instead of the story that prompted the theory, I've only read the theory. This, despite the fact that I am well aware that I wrote the chapter, published it, and even read it for its audiobook version. I've been skipping the first part because it discusses a younger version of my father, teaching a younger version of me about a lesson about theft. And the way he decides to do it makes me squirm, still squirm today. More so as my father becomes more and more a sweet little boy on account of the late stage Alzheimer's he has entered. It is a cruel and complicated disease, Alzheimer's, and it is not without its mercies. In my father's case, it has opened a little window for us into my father's boyhood. Even as he breaks my heart into a million pieces when he looks at me quizzically with his still brown pupils, ringed now with gray-blue irises, signs of the advancing cataract, and asks, you said you're my wife's daughter, is that true? Or are you my real daughter? Or where are your parents from, India? At other times, he laughs freely, joking with me when I try to get him to do some exercises, like apple picking. He reaches over and grabs my hands, laughing. I'd rather catch the tree, he says. Even as he forgets who he is, he remembers who he was. What? No way, he says incredulously when I tell him his age and mine. Because in his mind, he's getting younger and younger, and I'm getting older and older. As I massage his feet and legs with organic raw shea butter, he smiles sweetly, thinking of the melas, the fairs he used to go to as a little boy. He used to run off with friends and not tell his parents where he was going, so he'd get beaten when he came home. Why'd they beat you? I asked protectively. They were worried about me, he says. They didn't know where I was. It was wrong for me to just leave without telling them. We had this conversation after I read him a story about fairs coming through town, announcing their arrival with drums in the early morning hours. A family setting off to the fair a few kilometers away, walking along dirt roads between farmlands. This was the olden days before Facebook and Instagram. Early morning drums did the job then. The book we're reading is a 4th grade Urdu textbook put out by the state of Punjab that I studied as a child. As I read him stories from this book, my father is easily moved, crying out of pride or sorrow or gratitude. He cries when we read about the poet who dreamed up Pakistan, Muhammad Iqbal, or the person who led Pakistan to independence once the British left, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Or was it that it was he the British left behind? He cries when we read about Asma bint Abi Bakr, the 12-year-old girl who took food to the Prophet and her father as they hid in a cave near Mecca. He cries when we read about the 3 men trapped in a cave, a large rock covering its mouth, the rock moving only as they pray and reveal their good deeds. He cries when the little girl who is going to buy milk for her sick mother loses her dollar and is offered help by a little boy who gives her his dollar, which was meant to buy him a school book. He cries a lot and laughs a lot too. When Rumi plays with my nephews a version of the never-ending story, promising them that he is absolutely going to stop talking this very second, and then keeps on talking about how he's going to stop talking just after this sentence, and my nephews 4 and 7 are laughing hysterically, catching onto the joke, I see my father laughing with them, slapping his thigh, catching his breath to say, he's not stopping. And he loves freely now too. This man who has not kissed me since I was in 4th grade, who hugged me rarely, and when he did, kept his body stiff and apart, now melts into hugs and kisses my cheeks and my hands. Lets me interlace my fingers with his as we sit close to each other, our heads touching, reciting Surah Yasin along with Khalil Khusri on my phone. Me saying the words, making sounds, because he does not remember the words, but singing along anyways. When I'm tucking him into bed and he momentarily remembers who I am, he says, you're a good daughter, I'm happy with you. Another time, as we're holding hands, going up the stairs, he says, Pardes mein bhi hamari beti hamara dhyan rakh rahi hai. Even in this foreign land, our daughter is taking care of us. After all these decades here, 6 out of the 8 that he has been alive, this is still not where he is supposed to be, not the land he is supposed to live and die in. He doesn't remember that I'm his daughter, but he remembers the story of the nation state, the story of Pakistan. This is not where he is supposed to be. It's like all the hardness he had accumulated over the years, all the hardness he had to learn as a little refugee boy, running from home with his family in the wreckage of British theft, as a boy in a new town, in the new nation of Pakistan, as a young brown immigrant to Canada, a cold and white country, as a welder and pipe fitter working contract jobs at the mercy of the foreman, some who were nice, some who were not, one who fired him for praying Jummah. All that hardness is melting away as he forgets all the things that made him hard to begin with. What's left behind is this lovely, sweet, gentle boy. How can it be anything but a gift for a daughter to meet the boy her father was? Amidst the devastating heartbreak, there is this strange and wondrous blessing. And this gift is a teaching. And the teaching is that none of us are fixed. None of us are one moment or one action. Puritan thinking would have us fixed in both senses of the word. And that is why it is such a violence, because we are entangled creatures of change. We return to Octavia Butler again. All that you touch, you change, and all that you change changes you. And so the man in the story, the man who is my father in this essay, I'm about to tell you a story about, that man is no longer. Though he retains the skin and the shape of this man you will hear about, though he bears the same name, though he is still my father, and though I am still his daughter, whether he remembers this or not, you would be hard pressed to find the man in the story if you met my father today. And yet, the younger man made me, formed me, shaped me. And the older man is transforming me with him still. It is precisely because the younger man was who he was that this older man is a mercy. I will read this chapter called Theft for you with that caveat. So it's page 42. Thank you. When I was little, say maybe 4 or 5 years old, I joined my mother on a visit to her friend's house. We didn't grow up wealthy. My mother managed our home, produced and raised 6 children. She did this mostly alone because my father worked long hours and was often at work when we were awake. When I was young, we lived in rental apartments, and whenever we had to move and my parents had to find a new apartment to rent, they would leave us with friends. They would hide the fact that they had so many children. They would hope that the landlord would not ask how many children they had, so that they would not have to lie. But they lied when necessary. Most landlords would balk at the idea of 3, 4, 5, and eventually 6 children living in a small space. It was difficult to explain to them that we were not spoiled and undisciplined like Gora children. We were South Asian and Muslim and unable to afford living in large houses. We were not going to be allowed to misbehave, run wild, and destroy our chances of living somewhere. At the time of this visit, when I accompanied my mother to her friend's house, we were living in a small 2-bedroom apartment in downtown Toronto, 4 children in a 2-bedroom apartment. We did not have a lot of furniture. We had a couch for entertaining, a kitchen table and chairs, but we did not have beds. My parents thought wall-to-wall carpeting was amazing. Who needed beds? Just throw down a sheet and pillow and you're set. Plus, beds were expensive and took up a lot of space. What was the point? My father worked as a pipe fitter and a welder. He sent extra money back home to Pakistan to support extended family on both sides and Islamic causes. We were fortunate to have so much. But when we visited other people, I saw how little we had. Other people had fancy bedroom furniture, dressers, side tables, elegant beds. Some girls had princess beds with a canopy. Oh, how I envied these children. They had TVs, they could watch movies. My mother's friend even had a cabinet full of only decorative stuff. She had little crystal figurines in it, like a bird or a bear. And I watched the light create dazzling colors as it filtered through the crystal. I could see purples and pinks and greens. I became mesmerized and obsessed with one figurine of a bird, its wings just spread for flight. It was so elegant, so beautiful, so bewitching. I touched it. It was stunning. I couldn't part with it. Before we left this auntie's house, I pocketed it. She had other beautiful things. She wouldn't miss it, and I needed to have it. So I stole it, except I was too young to understand the concept of theft. But the adults understood. Her friend called her home later that night and told my mother that the figurine was missing. My mother assured her that she would deal with it, and she did. by teaching me a lesson about stealing, which is taking something that belongs to someone else without their consent. Apparently, it did not matter how much you liked it or needed it. When my parents consulted with one another and considered how they would teach me the lesson about stealing, the conversation portion of the lesson was not immediately followed by a lesson on forgiveness, where I returned the figurine to its owner, apologized, and am forgiven. That did happen eventually. But first, there was a theatrical detour. In Islam, my parents taught me, if you steal, your hand gets chopped off. And since I had stolen, I deserved to have my hand chopped off. My father was to do the deed. And this is how it came to pass that I remember crouching behind the couch we used for entertaining, squeezed between the wall and the back of the couch, terrified, looking up as I see my father peering down at me, brandishing an axe. Or at least that is what I have believed my entire life until recently, when recounting this story to a group of friends, they convinced me that it was more likely a hatchet. Obviously, I did not know the difference. I was crying, and at some point, my mother pulled me out, hugged and consoled me, assured me that though I had narrowly escaped punishment this time, there were no guarantees next time. Better not steal again. I think my parents were proud of themselves for doing such a great job teaching me a valuable lesson. It would not do to have their children stealing. This was serious. You couldn't fuck with the law. They were uncertain of how they would help me if I got in trouble with the law, if I got in the habit of stealing. Better nip this in the bud. In his book, Between the World and Me, Ta-Nehisi Coates talks about how his parents beat him out of fear for what might happen to him in the streets at the hands of white authorities. The beating was meant to be a kind of protection, a kind of love. It seems they believed that the violence they employed to educate Coates would serve him well, especially if it saved him from violence beyond the house. As long as they were doing the hitting, they were in control of it. They loved him, so they would not hurt him irrevocably. He would not die at their hands. In this way, violence becomes a teaching, a kindness, a mercy even. My mother always says, "Mohabbat ki maar makhan se bhi naram hai." A beating from love, a love beating perhaps, is softer than butter. Maybe Coates's parents figured that there was some algorithm that determined the amount of violence in the world, like we were all owed a portion of it. And if they administered it themselves, they could control it, be measured and merciful with their son's quota, because they could not trust the authorities, the state, to be measured or merciful. The state and its apparatus are monstrous, murderous, careless, merciless with bodies of color, especially with Black bodies. Or maybe they thought a certain level of violence was necessary to keep him in line so that he might never encounter the authorities, which feeds the myth that the authorities are only ever involved when we step out of line. Or maybe. This is what the state does to the population it marginalizes. It dominates us with such ferocity. The mere threat of its violence is so terrifying. It fools us into imagining that our controlled violence against ourselves, will spare us greater, more fearsome violence. And so the state comes to appear benevolent in the face of our own monstrosities, and we hurt the ones we love in the name of love and protection through violence. I have two memories of my grandfather, both from family trips to Pakistan. In one, he's in a bed in one of the rooms in my mom's portion of the house. The room is painted a light shade of green. It is a house that my grandfather claimed after partition. He fled to Pakistan from India with his family, leaving behind farmlands, cattle, and a haveli, a compound of houses, immovable wealth. Apparently, the way it worked during partition was that if you survived the massacres in your hometown, escaped the knives of your neighbors, jewelers, butchers, and school teachers, once friends, now turned enemies based on lines drawn by white men over lunches in posh rooms. If you survived the violence along the way on the roads and train stations, stations turned for a little while into battlefields and slaughterhouses, running red with rivers of blood. If you finally made it to the place where you were supposed to be, which was not your home because that had been left behind, but the place where it had been decided by the people who would never be called thieves, that you'd have to start your life over, then what you would do is find an empty house, another displaced family's home, and move into it and claim it as your own. Finders keepers following partition, displacement, and massacre. The house my grandparents settled into is a large home that used to belong to a Punjabi, Hindu, or Sikh family. We know this because it was abandoned. My grandfather claimed it. Growing up, I heard this was a wealthy family's house, evidenced by the fact that they had left behind an entire trunk full of chocolates. Now the house is partitioned in two as my grandfather lies weak, ill, and dying, surrounded by his children and grandchildren in a room in a part of the house that two of his 7 sons live in. The other half is occupied by another son. The sons split the house in two, and the partition was not amicable. The brothers fought over portions of the house, each feeling cheated out of his fair share. And the 3 who claimed the house, 2 in one section, 1 in the other, screwed their remaining siblings, including my mother, out of their rightful claim over a house the family barely had a claim over to begin with. I'm not sure how old I am in the scene. Maybe I'm 5. The white-bearded, light-skinned, frail man on the bed, my grandfather, is dying. Some people are weeping, speaking in hushed tones. There is a sense of great importance in the room. Something is about to happen. I'm not there when it does. I'm told that just before he died, he smelled blossoms, asking, where are all these flowers coming from? There were no flowers in the room. This is a good sign. The smell of flowers means he's headed to Jannah, the garden, paradise, encountering its smell before its sight. He smelled heaven while still alive in the liminal space between life and death, when he could still communicate, when he could still tell us, there are flowers in paradise, I smell them. The next time I see him, he is dead. His washed body lying on a charpai. There is a huge slab of ice the size of a coffin underneath the charpai, cooling the body from below so it does not rot. The body, the charpai, the coffin-sized block of ice are all in the courtyard of the house. I think it is summer and early evening, so likely about 7 p.m. Some of the adults are wailing. My mother's sister brings me close to the body. Go ahead, look at him. He's your nana, your grandfather, your mother's father. The words for maternal and paternal grandfather are different in Urdu, nana and dada respectively. The difference between these grandfathers is significant. You have different claims over each. They have different kinds of power over you. Go ahead, look at him. Here's your nana. Even now, as I remember or manufacture this scene, I am aware that she means to convey something important to me, but I don't get it. Not then, not now. What is she trying to tell me? Maybe she wants me to know where I'm from, my maternal lineage. Maybe she's just overcome with grief, and this encounter has nothing to do with me. That's more likely. This is about her. But I don't know that when I'm 5. And more than 30 years later, I remember that exchange, but I doubt she has any recollection of it. I go into a dark back room off the courtyard, crossing into another section of the house, and hang out with my cousins who are also children. We discuss and try to process what has just happened, how we should behave. Our grandfather just died, says one cousin. We should be sad, says another. Let's cry, suggests a third. Good idea, we agree. So we try to make ourselves cry, mimicking the adults, forcing feelings of sadness I don't actually feel. After all, I never had a relationship with this man who has just died. This man named Asadur Rahman. Beautiful name when you think about it. Not the Lion of God, but the Lion of the Merciful. A name that holds opposites, that imagines fierceness and mercy together at once. As I think back on this strange memory of being in a dark room that feels like a cave, the walls made of stone and brick, moisture seeping through them so the room feels damp, pretending to be sad, fake crying at the death of a grandfather I never knew, I wonder, is this the first memory I have of feeling like a fraud? I wonder too, can grief be stolen? What I'm really asking is, can grief be owned? There's a contested story about the British East India Company involving the thumbs of Bengali weavers. According to oral accounts, the thumbs of Bengali weavers were cut off by the British to prevent them from competing with the East India Company in the textile trade. But a written account by a colonist himself states that the East India Company's labor practices were so horrific that Bengali weavers cut off their own thumbs rather than allow their labor to be stolen by the British. Where does the truth of the missing thumbs lie? In the oral history of indigenous peoples or the written history of colonizers? Memories too, it turns out, can be stolen. In the episode with the hatchet, I was never physically hurt. The mere threat of violence was enough to put the fear of God in me. The fear of God can be more merciful than the fear of the state. God can be shaped and reshaped by us, but we are helpless before the state. And it worked. I learned the lesson I was supposed to, that people and things can be owned, that some people own more things than others, that ownership is virtuous, and even more, it is a protected right. Taking something that someone else claims ownership over is called theft. It does not matter how little you have, or how much they have, or how they came by what they have. Taking it is a crime and a sin, The crime is both moral and legal. Laws, religious and secular, punish the thief. The punishment is often physical, whether it involves cutting off a hand or confining you to a cage, stealing years from your life. I learned this lesson living on stolen land stolen by Europeans from the indigenous peoples whom they mistook as Indians and then called Indians anyways, stealing their identities, their names, their children, their land, their kin, their children, their language, teaching us that what is not owned can still be stolen. So the lesson I learned was this: the powerless have only a merciful God to rely upon, whereas the lesson I learned was this: the powerless have only a merciful God to rely upon, whereas the powerful can rely on the mercy of the state.
Well, where do we go from here? I would like to have time to have some discussion with Ayesha and also then open it up so that you all can have some questions of her. And not just the room here, but also those who are online. Okay. I found that first of all, tell you about the book. In your search for understanding of your own life experiences, you have situated in the larger themes of patriarchy, of Puritanism, of racism, of colonialism, and of immigration. And so these are vast and complex subjects, and you try to understand it, not just yourselves as a person, but also the communities of Canadian Muslims. I find the book, you call it The Color of God, we'll talk about that, moving, complicated, powerful, and more importantly, I find it courageous. And it is a tale, though, what you read, you've lifted it and made it a little more, not abstract, but not as personal as it was. I find it a tale of sorrows, of losses, of deprivation, rage, and yes, of understanding and of love. And I think what you read to me showed all those things in it. Thank you for your courage and honesty. I hope this in turn allows us to ask you respectful and honest questions. And the title of the book is called The Color of God, and it's from the Quran, where it is that what is better than the color of God, but also is the name of your beloved nephew, who died at the tender age of 4. So I think it has both those meanings for you, if I assume. And he asked you about what it was, and he said that he thought the color of God was green or light brown. That was lovely. We hope to have some time for discussion with all of you who are present. And so I would ask if we could please keep our questions short, and also, of course, ask you to keep your answers short. What my first question is, what motivated you and gave you the courage to write the book?
That's such a great question. I never meant to write the book. People said to me throughout my life, like when they would learn a little bit about me, they would say, "Oh, you should write a book about that."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Well, I'm an academic. I don't write books like that. Like I write, books more like my first book, which has there's pages in it that have more footnotes than they do text." And so I thought like those are the kinds of books I was going to write. And then I got this fellowship at Harvard for a year, and I wasn't teaching, and I was by myself, and I had a whole year to myself. And early in the fellowship, the first month, I just found myself sitting on a patio. I was supposed to be working on a different essay, and I just found myself writing in a notebook with a pen and paper. The sun was out, and I just wrote the first chapter of the book, actually, English. And when I finished writing it, I definitely felt like it sort of like came out of me. I didn't intend to write it. And when I finished writing it, I called Rumi, my partner, who at the time was at Stanford for a year, on a fellowship there. And I said, "Hey, I wrote something. It's really weird. I've never written anything like it before. Can I read it to you?" And he was like, "Oh, we're taking a walk. It's a good time for you to read to me." And so I read it to him, and he said, oh my gosh, like I had to sit down. It's like, I've never heard this voice out of you before. You just keep writing. And so, and I was in this fellowship with a lot of writers and poets and filmmakers, and they just sort of like, I read some pieces to some people, and they just encouraged me to continue writing. And I tell that story to say like, that writing in my mind only happens in community, and it happens with like a lot of support and a lot of care. And I am really grateful that I had that. So I kept writing, and they were just like, don't think about what you're going to do with it. Like, just don't worry about it. And I wrote 5.5 notebooks, and then this is about 1.5 of those notebooks. So
lots more.
there is more. Yeah. Who knows what Hogben will take though? Yeah.
Yeah. Just to talk a little bit about this group that your family belonged to, called
Tanzim
Tasneem Islam,
Mhm.
and the leader was a man called Israel Ahmed.
Mhm.
Is he still alive in Pakistan?
He's not.
He's not, okay. But he was from Pakistan,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Well, India and then Pakistan. Yeah.
Okay. And I thought what he did was he tried to discard any ethnic or racial identity
Mhm.
and wanted it to be just a religious
A
identity.
pure Islamic
religion.
identity.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting, he wasn't an Arab.
No.
He didn't probably understand Arabic as well as an Arab would have, and yet
Yeah.
he wanted to create that.
Mhm.
And you call it a fundamentalism cult.
Yeah,
Is that how you still see it?
I do. I do. You know, it was a political organization. I do think it was a fundamentalist cult because he preached a fundamentalist version of Islam, and he described it as that. Like people were, he used that word to describe it himself. And when people questioned him about it, he said that he meant to do that because he was trying to return to the fundamentals of Islam. And so why should he be ashamed to be doing that? And I think of it as a cult because it was meant to, it was like a sort of a fringe organization. And it sort of like, it had all of these hallmarks of a cult. Like you took an oath of allegiance, you agreed to listen and obey, sama wa ta'a, and he created, all the chapters were called usras, which means family. And it was meant to replace your family. And it was meant to sort of alienate you from your own community and build this new community. So it wasn't like creating more community in your life. It was like creating an exclusionary community in your life so that you would, a lot of people felt alienated from their own families as a result. And so, and my parents, you know, as I talk in the book, my father went to Jummah one Friday in Canada, and Isra Ahmed was giving the sermon at Jama Mosque in Toronto.
Yeah.
And my father heard the sermon, and he was just really moved by it because Isra Ahmed made him feel like, where he was preaching a version of Islam that made him feel like he could belong to something bigger than himself. You know, like he was an important person in history, that Pakistan had a special role to play. And it gave him a sense of like meaning that he was really missing at the time. And so, you know, he on a whim, like he just joined it. And, you know, my mother got into it. And so I was raised, it's almost like they converted to a new religion because it's not a form of religion that they had grown up with, that they had ever experienced in Pakistan. And so they raised us all, like, you know, they pulled my older siblings out of extracurricular activities. I was just like, this was a year I was born, so I was very little. And so, yeah, I felt like I was raised in this home that like had the religious zeal of like new conversion. Yeah.
One of the things was that you talk about the different themes. I found that there were some things which are really more practices of segregation, kind of a retreat, and also how it shows in the clothing to differentiate you from everybody else. And one example that you give was wearing the niqab instead of eating. You know, how difficult it was to eat. And so I don't know, but the niqab ended up limiting your food intake and led to anorexia.
Yeah, it did. In my case, I mean, it doesn't for everybody. And I like, so it is
And I
important
love
to say.
it. I mean, I don't like swearing, but I love when she says wearing the niqab was exhausting.
You can say it. You can say it.
Fucking exhausting. Not a word. My husband's having a fit there. But I just thought, wow.
It was a very complicated experience, you know. But I think my parents' idea was that they felt like they were being discriminated against because of the color of their skin. And if they, you know, held on to like this hyper emphasized religious identity, then their discrimination would be because of their religion. And it was like something that they were choosing to don, something they were choosing to wear. And that it would, so then when people discriminated against them, they would get virtue, they would get sawab, they would get reward for it. And it gave them a control in a way over their experience. And it kind of worked, I think, because they felt like, maybe like we wouldn't experience racism in the same way then. And we didn't. Like we grew up in such a hyper, like a religious, in a religious environment where our religious identity was so hyper performed that I kind of didn't think about myself as brown until I was in my 20s. So it did kind of work in that way.
Well, one of the things was that one of the rationales for wearing the hijab really is to protect a woman, right? As a protection of a woman. How do you understand this with your experience on the jet ski?
Right.
This is, I don't know if any of you know that, but she was wearing the hijab, I mean the niqab, not even just the head. And you went with a friend of yours to Egypt, isn't it?
To Syria, yeah.
Syria. And so she wanted to show that even that what she was wearing, she was sort of free, she was able to do the same thing any other woman could do. And off she went behind a man who took her on the jet ski. And it was quite exciting and so on. But then go ahead.
You go ahead. Well, I was molested on the jet ski, and it was sort of like this. One of the points of that chapter is to talk about these narratives that we have about purity. Like the lie of, I think, patriarchy is that the thing that will protect us, like the thing that will protect us is the thing that hurts us. And so, it's this idea: if you wear a hijab, you're not gonna, you're sort of, it's a protection, or you wear the niqab, it's a protection, but it wasn't obviously a protection. And so. And of course, it isn't a protection, and not necessarily. It's not because of what you wear that you get harassed or molested. So, and
some years ago, I don't know if you saw this, there was a research done in Cairo about women who wore the hijab, not the niqab as much, who were less harassed by men on the street than those women who did not cover themselves. That was the premise of the thing. But the findings were that the hijabi women faced the same amount of negative attention as the other women did.
isn't surprising.
This was
at all.
in Cairo, yeah. And I'm reminded, the other thing is about when I'm saying that you wrote about segregation and retreat. I'm reminded of a research project CCMW did some years ago on what we called segregation. And your story of traveling from Mississauga and your home in Mississauga to the downtown campus and returning without ever venturing beyond those confines. It's very much what CCMW's research showed, that we thought women were integrating because they were working in the, and we found it wasn't. They were creating little passageways from home to work, from work to grocery shopping, from grocery shopping back, so that there were these passageways, but no interaction really with anybody else. And your description seemed very much to have done the same thing. Am I correct?
Yeah, seems like it. Yeah. Yeah, and it's sort of like, I think I was just sort of like in that chapter, education, I think it is, where I'm just thinking about, like, I was downtown for 6 years. I took this bus downtown, and I could have just like walked down Bloor Street, or I could have, and I just never did. And it's interesting to me, that choice, that those choices that I made, that I didn't feel like I was constricted while I was doing that. I didn't feel like I wasn't allowed to. I just thought, oh, I don't care to go beyond this place. But at the same time, when I did finally walk beyond those confines, that like the campus, I was amazed at the world outside of it. And I was like, it made me wonder, like, was it the case that I really never wanted to go out, or was there a part of me that felt like I wasn't allowed to go out beyond there? And so it's sort of like, I'm kind of, we often think in this society, in the world, in the contemporary world, the idea when we think about women's rights is so much about choice. And I'm kind of problematizing those ideas. Like, choice is not as clear cut or as we think about, as we might think it is. And we might think, it's really complicated, it's as complicated as all of us are. Yeah.
Well, that was very interesting. The other thing is, I would love you, if you don't mind, talking about the wearing of the niqab. Well, you're not the hijab, but for you it was the niqab, and the removal of it. Putting it on, taking it off.
Yeah.
And what does it signify for you? What does it mean to you?
Well, I think, one of the things that I don't do in the book is tell a story of unveiling. And a lot of people are really curious about that. Like I got an email from somebody, I think from New Zealand recently, who said, I read your book. I love it. I've told my friends about it. I missed the section about the unveiling. Can you tell me what page number it's on? And I was like, well, I never wrote it. I never wrote it. That's why. And I think the reason I didn't write that story is because normally there's this arc, the story that's told of like you're like oppressed and you're covered, and then you remove it and then you're liberated. And I think one of the things I'm doing in this book, and especially when we get to Hair Diaries, and especially in that chapter, is that like that's just a lie. Like this idea of like your freedom or your oppression is based on how much or how little you wear. It's like a false story, and it doesn't tell us anything actually, and we have to go deeper for those questions. And so that's why I didn't do that in that.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
No, I can understand why you didn't, because
Right.
everybody expected it.
Right.
And
And
why it was,
And so I think like with wearing it to not wearing it, it doesn't, I mean, I'm not sure it signifies anything.
really?
Yeah.
To take it off?
Yeah. What do you want it to signify?
I don't know. It's your story. So it didn't signify anything. Yeah.
What do you wish I would say?
I ain't putting words into your mouth.
Yeah, no, I don't think it really does. To me, it's sort of like, it was a complicated choice to wear it. And it's a complicated choice to not wear it.
Was it a complicated choice to wear it? No, it didn't sound like
It was, yeah. I mean, that's
Really?
one of the things I think about, like I sort of feel like pressured into wearing it, but then also I start owning wearing it.
Yes.
And then I get so upset that people are criticizing me for wearing
Yes.
it. And then it becomes a part of my identity,
Yes.
and then when I remove it, and so the wearing it of it is very complicated.
Yeah.
And then I think the removing of it is very complicated
it
as
is, yeah,
well.
yeah.
And yeah,
Mm.
that's an unsatisfying answer right now.
No, it's
Yeah.
okay. That's what it is.
Yeah.
No. This is not so much a question now, but this is my last bit, and then I want to open it up to people to answer. Would I be right that for me, you come across now as unfettered? The word came to me, oh, she's unfettered now.
Hmm.
And free and not controlled, I guess is the word, which is, for example, the topics you discuss are pretty shocking in any way.
Like what?
No, I'm not telling you. The swear words you use, the decisions you and Rumi have made
Mhm.
about your lives,
Mhm.
the hair,
Mhm.
pretty unfettered.
I guess I would say that I'm using, like I talk about, there's moments where I talk about like the intimacies of my life, right? Is that what you mean? That feels unfettered?
No more than that. Unfettered means that you're suddenly like, shh,
Yeah.
the covering is gone.
Mhm.
The covering of your mind is gone.
Mhm.
You can say all these dirty words. There's freedom to do that.
Yeah.
This
I guess I don't think of them as dirty words, actually, first of all. So there's that. So I think of them as just sort of like, I think I say in this talk, like I'm sort of resisting in both like form and content in the book, ideas of purity, of like what a good
Yes,
person looks
yes,
like, right?
yes.
So I think the words that you feel might be dirty are not, in my mind, are not. And
no.
right. And I feel like they're sort of like how I think, and I'm sort of, share, like I'm using a wide range of vocabulary.
Yeah, but you
to
wouldn't have
think.
used them earlier.
I probably would have. Even when I wore niqab, I love the F word. Yeah. Well, I think I would have anyways, So I think that's just like sort of part of how I think about that. But I think, I think when we live in society, we're fettered all the time. Like there's all sorts of ideas about
Yeah.
like how you're supposed to behave in a professional context, what kind of discipline you write in, how you're supposed to write, what a book should look like. And I think I find myself sometimes like, okay with some of those constraints, and other times like trying to push against those constraints, right? So like, for example, with this book, I think it was very hard for people to be like, to understand, like in the marketing world, like what genre is it? Is it a collection of essays? Is it a memoir? Is it an academic work? Is it like, are you just writing stories? So there was like a lot of conversation around that because the book doesn't easily, like the books of a lot of people of color, it doesn't easily fit into a genre. It doesn't like easily fit into the discipline of Islamic studies in what is considered proper academic writing in Islamic studies. But at the same time, you know, a lot of people read it and they're like, this is such a Islamic studies text. I feel like you're making all of these arguments about like the theology of death or thinking about, you know, the jurisprudence of purity, et cetera, et cetera. So there's like, so I feel like we all are always negotiating these sort of constraints that we have. And the book is an example of one of the ways, like it's sort of like a window into some of the ways that I negotiate those things. I wouldn't say that I feel unfettered. I do feel, yeah, I don't think I feel unfettered. I just feel like I'm more willing to experiment with the boundaries that are presented to me. Yeah, maybe I have like I'm more comfortable doing that. Yeah,
That comes.
yeah.
So may I interject?
Yeah.
Can I?
We have a few minutes left for
Yes.
questions and answers. And I know that one person had their hand up in the virtual world.
Okay.
So
Well,
if-
could we, sorry, can I just, are there people here?
yeah, so just before I do that, so I just wanted, if you did have your hand up, maybe you could pose your question using the Q&A feature and we will get to your question. There are some questions, I think, from the audience here in person. I think Ahmed, you had your hand up.
Yeah, it was, you know, the unveiling, was it in phases, was it the cob first and then hijab?
Yeah, was it what?
Because
Yeah.
The cob and hijab are two totally different things in my view, right? My stepmother grew up with a hijab her whole life, whereas my mother never wore hijab her whole life. I think it's a personal choice, but then the cob is another step forward, right? And then I just want to know if you did it in steps, or was it just the cob on, the cob off?
It was, you're making me tell I'm not gonna tell a story, but you want to know about the unveiling. I did, it was in steps. It was, I stopped wearing niqab first. I still wore hijab and jilbab. Then I started wearing jilbab and long skirts and shirts. And then I stopped wearing hijab. Yeah. And then I would wear it sometimes and not other times, etc. And I still do. Yeah.
Oh, that's, yeah.
Thank you.
Ayesha, can I ask
Yes,
something? Throughout the book, I was thinking about your other siblings.
Hmm.
How are they, what do they think about the book? And
Yeah.
is it their memory also?
Yeah. You know, I think one of the things I talk about, even in the passages that I read with theft, I say, you know, I remember whether I say something about remembering or manufacturing a scene. So throughout the book, I do this, like I play with memory and I talk about like the slipperiness of it and how creative and act it is. And I think in doing that, I was like making space for alternative stories to the ones that I was telling. And I'm being really clear that the stories that I'm telling are my memories of what happened. And my siblings did read the book and they all loved it. And they felt like, but you know, they felt like I'd left them space. Like I wasn't telling their stories. You know, it's my story, but like none of us are an island unto ourselves. So our stories are never our own. They're always interconnected with other people. But they didn't feel like I was telling their stories or misrepresenting their stories or not leaving room for their stories. You know, they might have disagreed about something here or there. Like when I talk about my older brother building the basement in the house in Mississauga, my younger brother is like, I was doing a lot of work for that too. You know, he felt like he wasn't recognized, or like there's little things like that came up, but nothing, nothing major, which I was, you know, I was really nervous about that. And I was really not sure how it was gonna go. I did share the last chapter, Please Water Me, with a few of my siblings before I published it, because that chapter especially, I wanted it to be a work of healing and I didn't want it, and it's sensitive and it's like so complex. And I really needed to know that I was I didn't want to do any harm with that writing. And I wanted to make sure. So I did read that. And so I had like a sense that of what because that was one of the hardest chapters for me to write. And if they were okay with that, I had a sense that they would be okay with the rest. And thank God they were. So, yeah, thank you.
So we have a question.
We have a question from the virtual audience. It's Selena asking, you say that this first storybook just opened up out of you one sunny day. How long did it take you to coalesce your train of thought into an edited final draft ready for sharing with the public?
That's a good question. It took me, so I started writing in 2015 and September of 2015, and then it was published last year, so in 2021. So I was writing and then I was transcribing. So I was editing while I was transcribing. And then I spent about 4 years just editing and re-editing the book and making sure that the stories that I was telling were stories. And this is actually might address your question about the unfetteredness too. Like there is like might be a freedom that comes across in the way I told stories, but I was so careful about which stories I told and which
Yes.
ones I didn't, and how I told the stories and what details I included and what details I did not include. And like up until the last, like I think right before we went to publication, I pulled 4 chapters out of the book,
Yeah.
you know, because I just wasn't ready for them to be in the world. So or they weren't making the argument the way I wanted them to make an argument, because each of the stories I tell in the book makes an argument. And like there's never a story there just for the sake of being there. And that's partly because I think that people of color, like sometimes our stories are kind of extracted from us or mined from us in order to justify, you know, like to justify that we deserve to be in the space that we're in. And I wanted to resist that impulse. And I want, so yeah, so it was like, so to answer the question, it was about 4 years of editing. And the editing, again, I have to say, like was in community. Like I read, you know, I read the whole book to Rumi, like multiple versions of it, my partner, but I also read it to friends of mine, like various chapters for various friends, and other people in my life who are really interested in listening and thinking through these questions with me. And I workshopped it with someone who's here as well, Mesa, who was in this over 3 days. And that was also a really beautiful experience to make sure I was getting, you know, lots of experiences, lots of perspectives, Muslim women perspectives, but also other perspectives on the book. Because again, I didn't want to do, you know, I can't control how the book, what people do with the book, but I did not want it to, I wanted my best for it not to do harm. So
There's
yeah,
a
thank
question,
you.
you said this, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for sharing this brilliant story and.
Could you just stand up and so we could all hear you?
Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of compliment the point which you made that unveiling is kind of a complicated choice as well, and maybe ask her that there is a story behind that, because I remember my wife used to do the job. She still does it, and she was in London, and she was twice or thrice called as bloody immigrants. And then I told her that you should move it because we are living in the Western world. And I researched in medieval Islamic and she was like, you are researching in medieval Islamic and you should be the one telling me to create it, and not the other way around. So there was a story, and she still like she said, no, I'm not gonna do it.
Right.
Because there was a story of this.
Can you hear it?
Is it complicated for you for that reason as well?
Yeah, you know, one of the chapters that I pulled sort of explores like all the reasons I wear it, or all the reasons, like at the point that I'm trying to decide wearing it or not wearing it, like all the reasons I want to continue wearing it and all the reasons I don't want to continue wearing it. And so many of those reasons are about like the external gaze, you know, instead of like something internal about what I want to be doing with my body. And I hope that hopefully I'll get to a point where I can like work that chapter enough that I can actually share it with the world. But it includes like a list, and there's like just like endless things, you know, like all the people who are like, sister, mashallah, like you're so amazing, like you're so successful and you're still wearing hijab, like that makes you somehow even better in their eyes. Or all the people who are like, you know, so disappointed if you're not, you know, like there's just like, but that's like only one of the directions that I'm thinking about it. It also happens in the other directions, right? So it's like if you kind of have to like internally negotiate like what's important to you and why are you doing what you're doing, and alongside the fact that you keep on changing and everyone around you keeps on changing. And so, and what it feels like to be wearing hijab or not, or niqab keeps on changing, or not wearing it keeps on changing as well. And so, yeah, it is really complicated.
Thank you. There are 2 questions. I know you want to have a hard stop at 9. We have 4 minutes before 9.
Okay.
9,
So
you want to stop it,
try-
sorry, I thought we were going to 9:30.
9.
It's from 7:30 to 9.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So the
Okay.
first question from the audience, I was just mentioning, there's 3 minutes now. So pivoting away from the storytelling topic, what are the author's views on the current situation on the girls or women-led revolution in Iran? So that's question 1. The next question is, what inspired the title Color of God, and what does this title mean for you? So
Thank you.
those are really great questions.
Yeah, thank you. I'll answer the second question first. If you read the book, you'll know. But it's it's based on this verse in the Quran, Sabatallah wa man ahsanu min Allahi sabwa, the color of God and what is more beautiful than the color of God. And that is the name of my nephew, after whom the book is named after. So I'll leave that there, and then hopefully if you read the book, you'll get to learn more about why that's important. And then in terms of the first question, it's just devastating and heartbreaking about what's happening in Iran. I don't think the state should ever tell women what they should or should not wear. And I am heartbroken that people have to put themselves in danger in order to fight for this right, and that the state is using religious language, manipulating it in order to take away their rights over their own bodies. Like it's really horrifying to see.
Well, thank you.
I
Okay.
have a quick question.
Yeah.
When I worked in federal was in my undergrad, and I felt so protected. I think it was the time I felt most at peace. And of course, like the male gaze is always there. And whether you wear it or not, whatever you wear has nothing to do with what happens to you in terms of harassment. We know that.
Yeah.
Misogyny is there. But I've never been able to yet put in words the type of solitude and just feeling at peace. I remember seeing everyone around me, like, with good hair, like, it was like trenches out there. I was like, I feel so bad for you. I'm good. And then slowly I started questioning techniques, and then I started getting into activism, and I was like, what is up with this type of fixation on what we wear? Why do I have to wear that to begin with? And my parents did not want me to wear it at all. But I just remember feeling protected. It was like the best time of my life. Nowadays, and you're right, it's not a binary.
Yeah.
It's not like you're protected and therefore misogyny is dead.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's not there. And nowadays, I feel like I'm really in the trenches though. Like I really, it's like I have to do my hair before coming to this event, and I feel like the male gaze is on me in a very different way, knowing that it doesn't disappear when I wear it.
Yeah.
But I do wish that we spoke more about the actual ways that it does protect those who do wear it, and they wear it for, by choice.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
All right, I hate to break up the party, ladies. It is 9 o'clock. And I know we could have gone on much longer. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming, and thank you, Ayesha and Alia, for making the trip. Ayesha all the way from UBC, from Vancouver. And I have to recognize Rumi, your partner, because you keep on referring to him. And so we have to tell people he's in the room. And I think he's an equal partner in the book, because so much, so much of the storytelling is about him and your life together. So thank you for coming all the way here.
Is there anything that you want to add? Why not, Rumi?
So I just want to say thank you to Anwar Iman as well for making space for us and partnering with us to bring us together in person. And we had a really good turnout online as well. So thank you all for joining us. And I'd like to thank our team, our CCMW team, Zainab, that you heard from at the beginning, Nina, our president. And there's a whole bunch of gremlins working behind the scenes that you don't see that are making this possible. And so thank you all for being here. And inshallah, we'll see you at our next Muslim Women Scholar Series. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We could have gone on for many more hours. Yeah. So interesting. That's so beautiful. You're amazing. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I appreciate that. Yeah, and thank you for making the drive all the way here. That's very good. It's very interesting. It's a pleasure.